On today's episode of Locked On Suns, what went wrong in Game 1 and how can the Suns fix it in Game 2? Simple, but maybe not easy. The great Howard Beck is here for his first appearance on Locked On Suns to help us answer all of those questions. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Tuesday to get yourself ready for Game 2 of Suns Clippers. Welcome back to the everydayers who have been listening every single day of the week. If you have not done so, hit follow or subscribe. Get locked on to your favorite team each and every day of the week. Some bonus episodes on the weekends when games and news allow. You can also follow along on Twitter at Locked On PHX Suns. Get in with your 7 words or less game take after Game 2 if you're on Twitter. Howard Beck is here to help us understand what happened in Game 1, a little bit of what might be brewing for the Suns going forward. Today's show, guys, is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Howard. So this is take 2. The people will let them in on our little secret that technology screwed us once. But I want to circle back on something you said on the Locked On NBA feed for those who might not have heard that show, or just to get a little more context, because I think there's some pessimism on your end about the ability of this Durant experiment, which I think it's fair to call it, coming together. And they benched some, they rested their players toward the end of the regular season for a couple games. The Durant injury obviously stole away 10 to 15 of those. And now they looked very unprepared and unready in that Game 1, to put it bluntly. So was that what you expected, or was it even worse than you expected in that game in terms of just having their bearings?
Yeah. So, Brendon, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. By the way, love the fact that you have a feature called 7 Words or Less, both because I love the homage to Mike D'Antoni and that era, which was a blast. But also just as a writer, trying to think of my own process, 7 words. I would fail miserably. I have not done anything in 7 words or less ever in my life.
Love to call people out when they go to 8 or 9. I do not. I'll retweet the good ones throughout the night just to get some interaction going. But if people go 8 or 9, they don't get to be featured. It's part of the rules.
Listen, rules are important in life, and on Twitter especially. Although it is a ruleless place. It's a hellscape. So that's a whole other podcast. I would just say this. So you use the word pessimism. I've never been pessimistic about this version of the Suns or the trade itself or Durant's ability or the Suns' ability to incorporate him. It's more of a skepticism. If people want to, say those two things may overlap, fine. But it was more the idea that when you acquire a player of his caliber, there always is an adjustment. Even with Kevin Durant, who we all call the ultimate plug and play superstar, there are still elements of the game that require a familiarity and a rhythm. We talk about chemistry all the time in this league. And if we're going to talk about it in the positive sense of this team seems really connected, this team really seems to have this sixth sense about each other and about the way they operate. And especially in tight games, they're on a string defensively. They know, intuitively where to find each other for open shots, or, they're crisp and they're out of timeout plays. Those things come from reps and from time. And so when we talk about chemistry, it's not some mystical, magical, happy talk thing. It's real. And if you talk to coaches and players and scouts, they will say that stuff matters. Now, talent matters more than anything. And the Suns, in getting Kevin Durant, got one of the most talented players in the history of the game. So my skepticism was never like, can Durant fit with Booker and Chris Paul and Ayton? Any of this stuff. It wasn't about, are there enough basketballs to go around? It wasn't about, usage rate and all that. But it is about trying to find a new equilibrium with a massive new piece. And then he's out for a couple of months. And again, I've said this so many times, but it's worth saying again. There's no precedent in NBA history that I'm aware of or that anybody else is aware of a player of that caliber playing literally 8 games and then trying to lead a team to the championship in the same season. And so even if Durant had gotten there in October, but only played 8 out of 82, I'd have the same concerns. It's not so much the trade, but to the other part of this point, and then the other reason for my skepticism, it wasn't just the lack of time together. It was also, you did give up some really important players, two-way players, perimeter defenders, and it hurt your depth. And I think what we saw if game one, validated anything that I believed or had skepticism about, it's that the depth is concerning, and maybe the chemistry isn't quite there yet. And listen, I don't want to go too far with this and say that the chemistry is the reason that Kevin Durant only took 15 shots when he's their best player. But maybe there's still a little bit of whether he's feeling out. A scout suggested to me that was a feel out game for him. And I think the scout meant it feeling out the Clippers defense in this matchup. But I think you could also interpret that as feeling out even his own team. Like, how are we operating in this circumstance, in this series? So yeah, I think all those things are fair to wonder about right now. It doesn't mean I don't think they can win the series. But those are fair concerns.
Absolutely. I almost wonder if the 8-0 was a bad thing for them. And I know that sounds super takey and ridiculous, but I think it's actually pretty straightforward. They just didn't, outside of the Dallas game, the Oklahoma City game when he came back the second time, those are really the only two against decent to good opponents where Durant and anybody on that team had to figure out, what do we do late in the game? What is our offense? And in each situation, we saw a different answer from the Suns. In the Dallas game on Sunday on ABC 2 months ago, whatever that was, the answer was Booker and Durant just trading off mano a mano against Luka and Kyrie. And Durant hits a fadeaway left shot off going left off the backboard, and the Suns win the game. In the Oklahoma City game, it was put the ball in Chris Paul's hands, run some real, Monty Williams, Chris Paul. You can imagine it up on a whiteboard type of offense, and they got 2 corner threes for Kevin Durant and a couple of dunks from Ayton, and they won that way against Shea and that team. So they have the answers, but I think it's sort of knowing what they like the best, right? Knowing when we're uncomfortable, what's our go-to. And I think that's what a lot of great offensive teams deal with. The difference here being that with, the Heat in 2011 or in 2010 versus, this, like, those were all the debates we had about LeBron passing to Udonis Haslem in like week 2 of the season when they're 8-8. This is like, it's the playoffs, and Kawhi Leonard is about to slay you, and you gotta figure something out. So I think there's versions of this series where the Suns are maybe in the lead comfortably late in a game, and maybe they don't have those issues quite as much, and it doesn't push them. But maybe in the long run, we'll look at this game as something that did kind of test them. I want to transition into the bench, the rotation, the sort of coaching battle, the chess pieces that were being moved there, Howard, because you had a quote from a scout on that side of things that I think was interesting, and it is another symbol of how much this Suns team is searching for answers. We'll do that after a quick break. First, I want to tell everybody about the Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. We love this game, honestly, and the stuff we're about to talk about with regard to the rotations, I think, is us putting our GM and coach hat on a little bit. And this game allows you to do exactly that. You manage every single strategic aspect of your franchise with Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, playing through seasons and leading your franchise and fans to glory as you build a historic dynasty. In the game, you deal with challenging personalities, hire the right coaches and assistants, trade and train players, make draft picks, and navigate your franchise through free agency and the draft, as well as all the ups and downs of multiple seasons. We've had tons of people, tons of hosts on the network actually win championships. It takes them like 10 to 15 years. Maybe you think you can beat us in that regard, but if you do things right, you get the ring that, unfortunately, if you're a Suns fan, you've never tasted. Sorry to throw that in there, but it's the fact. Locked On Suns listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. Download the game by visiting ProBasketballGM.com. Scan the code or look it up in the App Store. That's ProBasketballGM.com. Promo code Locked On to get a 100% free boost to your franchise. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. Okay, Howard. So 24 minutes from Landry Shamet in this game. No Cameron Payne, who is once again questionable for game 2. A surprise appearance from Ish Wainwright. One stint for Terrence Ross. Only one bench player playing more than 8 minutes. So it's fair to say that the Suns are searching for answers there. What do you make of that side of things? Do you feel like there's players who you expect more from, or is it going to be like this in your view going forward where it's a roll of the dice every night?
Yeah. So you alluded to it earlier, so I'll read it. Reading from the text that I read on the first time before we glitched out. The technology decided to rebel against us, like in the Terminator. This was a text from Scott from another team. Biggest thing right now is Phoenix's bench. They're brutally bad. And then he added, and I left this out earlier, but I'll throw it in this time since you mentioned Shamet. Having to play Shamet 20 plus minutes is going to kill them. Clippers are much deeper, bigger, and more physical. So that's an opposing scout. Listen, I like Landry Shamet, and I think he's a really good high level role player who I'd be happy to have on my team. But like a lot of role players and younger ones in this league, he can run hot and cold. You guys have, I'm sure, seen plenty of that. So this is, I don't think this is supposed to be, I don't think the scout meant this as a slam on Landry Shamet at all. It's just that you need more than that. And you're going to need some more reliable hands there. I'm a little surprised Terrence Ross didn't get more burn, among the guys that they added late in the season. I mean, he's, certainly got a lot of experience and can score a little. There aren't a lot of great options is the thing.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of us flagged the depth issue in the first place. A different scout that I was texting with, when I asked about the bench, came back with, sure, but there are players who can help there, and Monty needs to decide who he trusts, and kind of moved it back to a coaching. I would say a coaching issue. Yeah. It's not like it's a deficiency, but just more that at a certain point, even in a playoff series where you can tighten the rotation, you gotta find your 7 or 8 guys who you really can roll with. And they listen, playoff series are spaced out. Fine. You have more time for recovery. Fine. If you can avoid it though, you really don't want to be playing Kevin Durant 45 minutes.
Yeah. It really surprised me to see them do that from the jump. And that was one of the things, I really made my preview analysis because we had so little to go from. I really just went all in on this idea of like the Suns should go into this series with the question mark around Paul George, the doubt, I would say, around Paul George, and the fact that they are the better team. I think overall, because of their top level talent, they should go into this series trying not to have to adjust, like run everything so well that you don't have to adjust. And they came out, and I talked about this plenty, so I'm sure people don't want me to keep piling on, but they adjusted before tip-off. They started a new 5th guy with Torrey Craig. They threw some unique, we'll say, lineups out there with only one starter. I don't know how you play so many minutes for your starters and still end up with times where only one of them and a non-Kevin Durant one of them is out there. That was very confusing to me. It just feels like maybe the Suns overthought things a little bit, whereas Ty Lue knew exactly who his 9 were going to be. You could have looked at any of the last regular season games to know who they were going to be, and he knew what each of them was out there to do, and they knew it, And so I think it sometimes can be fairly straightforward in that regard. But I asked Monty after the game what he was looking for in the guys that he put out there. Just pretty open-ended question, because I really just was curious. I just didn't know, because it didn't seem to have a whole lot of rhyme or reason when you looked at it at the end of the game. And he said defense mostly, right? Like he wanted to have multiple options on Kawhi. He wanted to have guys to check Norm Powell, Eric Gordon, etc. And I just kind of fundamentally disagree with that view of this roster. I remember doing a show after that Oklahoma City game, Howard, where I was like, I basically said the Suns figured out their destiny as an offense first team. And it felt like they had figured that out. And now they're, game one of the playoffs, really leaning defense. I just look at Damian Lee as a floor spacing option, TJ Warren as a bucket getter, especially with how much the Clippers like to muck things up. I think it's useful to just have somebody who at the end of the clock can just go get a mid-range jumper contested and probably have a decent shot at making it or go draw a foul. TJ Warren can do that. And they've never committed to him since getting him, which I'm not sure on. But what do you think of that philosophy of just saying, at least for this playoff run, before we have another chance to fine-tune our roster this summer, we're an offensive team. That is going to be our identity. That's what we need to do to win these games.
Yeah, no, listen, I think there's a really strong case to be made along those lines. And I think maybe the difficulty is partially, the way Monty is wired as a defense first guy. Also, the pre-trade team was one where you had Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and once upon a time before the mysterious, we just won't talk to each other, Jay Crowder. Like you had all these lengthy wings who, while they could also score, you could emphasize the defensive identity and always have options within your rotation to have a strong defensive presence out there pretty much at all times. They don't have that luxury anymore. So to your point, if you don't have that luxury, lean into the luxury you do have. TJ Warren is a bucket getter. He has been everywhere he's been, and he's a big physical player too. And, one of those guys who, flirts with the line between confidence and overconfidence. But okay, fine. And Terrence Ross has been in this league a long time and can score a little, shoot a little. There are guys who can do other things. And if they are out there with some combination of your starters, maybe you've still got enough defense out there to survive if whether it's Ayton or Durant or somebody to kind of like make up some of the gap. There's risk for sure. And the Clippers are just deeper, right? Like, you would especially like, it's funny to say this. The Clippers are missing literally their second best player, their only other established star at this stage of their career, all due respect to Russell Westbrook's resume. But Paul George is the other guy that you really need, and that you're not winning a championship without, right? And yet they're still the team with the better depth by far right now, and have guys they're playing off the bench who, Norm Powell would start for the Suns right now. So and they've got any number of so Ty Lue has the luxury of, and again, this goes back to the very premise of how you build a team and team chemistry and continuity and all these other things that we talk about that feel very squishy but actually matter in the end. Yes, the Clippers made some significant moves at the trade deadline to get Plumlee and Highland. They did bring in guys and signing Westbrook. They did bring in guys who were new and were going to play immediate roles, and they had to adjust to them. But one, they had the time to adjust to them all. And two, they're all complementary guys. Three, they have had the same basic core for however many years running now, right? I forgot to mention the acquisition of Eric Gordon too. So they've got significant players that they added midseason, but they had time to adjust to them. And the Kawhi Leonard, Zubac, Batum, Mann, Powell, like they've had like a good core group together for a while. They know what they're about, and they know how they're going to play. And Ty Lue had enough time at least to invest in some of the newer players to get a feel for it, and to decide who he trusts. And maybe some of this is just that Monty Williams didn't have enough time to figure things out given all the injury issues that they had. But yeah, at some point you just got to, like, within a series, I don't think you can keep reshuffling. I think you got to, and you can't keep going, 40 minutes per night from some of your starters. So I don't know, throw names in a hat if you got to. Pick two or three guys and decide these are the ones I'm rolling with, because I need a 7 or 8 man rotation that gives me some reliability and predictability, and that gives me a data set that I can then learn from and say, this is working, and here's what we can keep rolling with.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. I think that I feel like we'll see more Jock Landale over Bismack Biyombo in game 2. I think we will see more Terrence Ross. And if Cameron Payne plays, I think that makes everybody's life a little bit easier. I went on a big campaign rant on Monday's show. Whether he's good or bad in a game, there's not a lot you can do to replace the trust level that Monty has and in him and the ability that he has to make players better. I think that Monty feels comfortable calling a pin down for Landry Shamet if he knows Cam Payne is the one delivering that pass to him in a way that he just doesn't if the ball is in Landry Shamet's hands, let's say, and suddenly, the shooter coming off the screen becomes Terrence Ross, right? So who just got here. So I think we will see some comfort if Payne is able to play. I do think we'll see more Landale, more Ross. Maybe Warren does play. Maybe Lee does play. But, again, you're talking about a whole scale reshuffling of the rotation if you do that. So maybe it is just playing more of the guys that you need who did play in game one and just focusing on what that 8 or 9 man rotation is going to be. I don't want to sound too negative, though, because the Suns are actually still 8.5 point favorites and minus 345 on the money line. That surprises me. I might not, if I was setting that line in a vacuum, might not have done that. But nevertheless, here we are. The Suns still heavily favored to win this game in this series. So let's talk about some of the positives, some of the adjustments, some things that I think are right there for them to do if they choose to and can pull it off. We'll talk about adjustments and how the Suns can win game 2 next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Game Time. Let's see. I missed out completely on concert tickets last week, and I didn't even have the chance to use the Game Time app, which might have been the biggest bummer because they were all gone. But I know playoff tickets are available for this Suns playoff series, maybe game 2 by the time you're hearing this. There might even be some available. Game Time is perfect for their flash deals and last-minute tickets. They're easy to find. Tickets for every kind of event. Footprint Center hosts comedy. They host all sorts of concerts of all kinds. They host everything, as well as all the comedy venues downtown and all the rest. My favorite part, though, images of seat views. This is something that a bunch of weird, archaic websites online have for you if you want to go find them. But with Game Time, it's right there when you're clicking on the seat to decide, do I want to buy it, which is where it should be, because you need to know that. Saw some people who got some Taylor Swift tickets from another provider that they were behind the stage and paid $700. You definitely don't want that. Game Time helps solve that problem. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of that difference if you let them know. Snag the tickets without the stress using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, Howard, so let's talk about adjustments for game 2, how the Suns might go about winning this game, which I very much think they can, especially being at home and knowing the pressure is on and having a lot of talent. That helps. Chris Paul was 2 of 8 in this game. And you did not join me for my Monday show, so the attacks didn't come your way. But I came away from that game feeling like Chris Paul should have gotten the ball actually more, especially in the first half. And I think people misinterpreted that I was saying he should have had it late, which he did, and I think that was actually part of the issue. But in the first half, I felt like they could have gone to him more. Now, I rewatched the game, and looking back, maybe I was a little bit too strong on that because he certainly did, especially right from the jump. They did run a lot of their bread and butter offense. He just missed shots. DeAndre Ayton turned the ball over or missed shots himself, and they got out to that 12-point deficit. But where do you stand on that balance? Because I think that's one of the fundamental things that we're kind of talking around here, but that the Suns need to figure out is Chris Paul is best when the ball is in his hands. Kevin Durant can be great off the ball, but you run the risk of a game where he takes 15 shots in 45 minutes, right? And then also there's the Devin Booker factor, who I think can fit in kind of anywhere himself, but it just felt like there was a lot of discomfort in balancing all of that. And then you look up and it felt like none of their 3-star playmakers had anything close to their best games, which is a bad outcome. What would you kind of do, and which version of that Suns offense do you like the most?
Oh boy. I mean, it's tough, right? And this all goes back to, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but this goes right back to everything you just said, goes back to that they didn't have enough of the time together to find the right balance and to figure out what was most comfortable and most effective. And I'm not sure what to expect from Chris Paul at this stage of his career, to be honest. I mean, he took 8 shots in game 1. He averaged 11 field goal attempts a game during the regular season, and has for the last couple of years. He's not someone you're going to lean on a ton anymore, but his ability to manipulate the defense and also to just, he's still good at drawing fouls. He's still, he's still good at getting to the line and making them. And only, got 2 free throws in game 1. I don't know what his average was for the season. I'll look it up, but yeah, he's still
close to that.
Yeah, 2.7. So yeah, he's not quite getting there as much as he used to, obviously. But Chris Paul has that ability to kind of, keep a defense off kilter. And so the ball does need to be in his hands to do that. But Kevin Durant needs the ball in his hands quite a bit, and Devin Booker needs it some. And this is the whole quandary. Maybe the answer to this quandary is to, shuffle the rotation as such that you're getting each of those 3 guys. So one, I would never sit all 3 of them together. You could tell me better than I would know.
Or even 2 of them.
Yeah.
Together. I mean, we saw some lineups with Booker and a bunch of bench guys, and that's just not going to be good enough for this team.
Yeah. So, I know this is contradictory because we were both talking about too, like you also don't want to, play Kevin Durant or Chris Paul a ton of minutes, but it almost is required if you're going to do it this way. But yeah, never have a lineup where all 3 of them are on the bench. And whenever possible, have at least 2 of the 3 out there with the role players. Partially because it helps prop up an otherwise weak second unit and take some of the pressure off the Landry Shamits and the Ish Wainwrights of the world. And partially because it will give each of the 3 stars a better opportunity to do what they do best with the ball in their hands. Outside of that, I mean, like there are other concerns. I mean, again, back to the scouts. I mean, one of them was saying like they really need to lean into their advantage with DeAndre Ayton, that if DeAndre Ayton wins, his battle, that gives them a big leg up in the series. And surprisingly, somebody actually flagged the idea that they need to, be hiding Chris Paul on defense more, which is not something we would have ever said about Chris Paul for the entirety of his career, but this is where we are. Yeah.
Kawhi went after him a little bit late. On second watch, I didn't notice it in real time because in my brain, I'm just like, yeah, Kawhi scored again. And it kind of becomes this, deja vu experiment a little bit in your brain of like, okay, which bucket was that? Whatever. But he did 2 or 3 times late in that game go after Chris Paul on a switch. I think that's sort of unavoidable. You're going to have to deal with that if you're going to close with Chris Paul, which outside of opening night against Dallas 6 months ago, they have closed with Chris Paul to a T. So that's probably just going to be there. I feel like offensively, yeah, the Ayton thing is interesting. They have this kind of bad habit, I would say, at times of when their stuff doesn't work right away, they sometimes, obviously you have to adjust. You have to go away from it, doing more simplistic stuff with Booker and Durant to, get things back on track offensively is good, but they don't always go back to the more, I don't even want to say complicated, but more like predetermined things that they start the game with. Like, for instance, Ayton on a switch, get Zubats to end up somewhere else and then have Ayton try to make a shot over whoever is now guarding him. And pretty much anybody besides Zubats, he has a decent chance of scoring against. They did it a couple times in the first quarter and then never again, really. They had Ayton making and taking a lot of mid-range shots and floaters against Zubats' drop, which, I guess is a fine outcome, but it felt a little excessive in that game. So yeah, getting him some easier post-ups, I could totally see that. I think they got baited a little bit into giving him the ball on the short roll and trying to have him make decisions and kick out to shooters and things like that. I don't know if we're quite at the break glass stage of this series, but the Suns just having Durant at the 5 as a roller or popper is a cheat code that they have not really ever gone to yet, but it is kind of staring them right in the face. And then, yeah, I think the bench stuff, like, can Chris Paul play fewer minutes if Payne is healthy and then maybe look a little bit better? Can Ayton play more minutes? I honestly just generally for all things that we talked about. He only played 33. We've seen him go higher than that in the past. It's interesting though. It's hard for me to get into a ton of specifics on adjustments when I just don't feel like they executed what they wanted to do all that well. But as somebody, Howard, the way I want to close this is as somebody who's maybe a little more familiar with the Clippers side, or more than me at least. What do you make of how they approached and maybe what we should expect from them in game two? Stylistically, X's and O's are just sort of big picture, knowing that Ty Lue tends to have a thing or two up his sleeve in these series.
He usually does. I'll be curious to see what else, and whether that comes into play. I mean, if they play the same way and win a game, we won't see those wrinkles maybe right away. I think. Sorry, getting something on my screen here. I think the Clippers have a very clear mission in terms of their plan of attack right now, right? Like, things are simplified without Paul George. You know who you're riding. It's Kawhi Leonard, and you know that you're gonna lean on Russell Westbrook quite a bit for just kind of the thrust he gives you. I don't think the Clippers would have anticipated winning a game where Russell Westbrook is going 3 for 19, but to Russ's credit, he's making, big defensive plays down the stretch, and he's doing other things that are winning plays. I gotta imagine they would like a little less Russ, and just in terms of the overall shooting period. They've got more efficient options, but this is what you buy into when you buy into Russell Westbrook. You're going to get the best and the worst of it. So I imagine, look, they'd probably like a little bit better balance in the offense and not have to over rely on Kawhi Leonard. The man does have an injury history of his own, but you don't have, a ton of other ways to go, right? Like, you've got shot creation in Westbrook and Gordon, and potentially Bones Highland when he's not just shooting every time. And in Terrence Mann, they do have other ways they can go. Like, what I like about them is they do have a lot of guys who can do something with the ball in their hands. Even Nick Batum as just kind of a connector and playmaker. It's the strength of it's why basically, listen, as of a month ago, 6 weeks ago, I'm trying to remember like when Paul George goes down. Before Paul George went down, when I was asking people the open-ended question around the league, who's coming out of the West, because the West has been so hard to figure out, the Clippers were a popular answer before Paul George went down. And it's because of all the things I was just saying. Like, they've got great balance throughout the rotation. They've got obviously guys who are offensive stars who can also play defense. They're really deep. They've got a great coach. Like, the only reason that they wouldn't have been favored in the series is by virtue of record and absence of Paul George. And, those are pretty big things, but they're still a really good team. All that said, as I say, like the people I've been talking to the last couple of days still expect the Suns to win this series.
That's what Suns fans will like to hear. One last thought from me on the Clippers is just, it's only been one game. We did not see the best shooting performance that they can have. Now, we definitely did not see the best shooting performance the Suns can have either. And I would expect the Suns have an emphasis on getting their shooters open too. But I think the Clippers do have an overall advantage in that category, between Powell shooting poorly, Batum not getting many up. Highland can get hot. Man, if he's wide open, consistently can make some of those. And some of the other players on their bench, I could see making a few as well who haven't played yet. So that is a very likely thing we will see at some point in this series, maybe as soon as tonight. We will see. All right, that wraps us up. A big thanks to Howard for joining us. You can catch him on all Locked On NBA shows throughout the playoffs. He'll probably make an appearance or two back here on Locked On Suns as the Suns make their run. Thank you to everybody for making Locked On Suns your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow on the show, obviously, a Game 2 recap. You can look forward to that. We will be back tonight as soon as I possibly can get that show up, and I'll catch you guys all then.